simply plugging in technology into a system to make it do something it's devised to do won't ever work.
Totally. And thank you so much, Aaron. That's incredible context, and I can tell that it's coming from somebody who's a deep knowledge of working in the field. But Kevin, over to you. Keen to hear from another experienced individual in the space who I believe has worked with Aaron in numerous situations on the ground.
Yeah, worked with Aaron for over 15 years, specifically around the Mountain West VOAD, but also through his brilliant technology of crisis cleanup. And just so glad that we're both on here talking about this as leaders in the nonprofit and VOAD spaces. We see some of the stagnation that has occurred over the years. You see technological advancements in all these other sectors, but it seems for some reason that disaster relief is playing catch up. And Aaron and Crisis Cleanup was really one of the first true technological advancements where the community really came around that technology. And I believe that it's used, it has been used in all 50 states and is currently used quite frequently in almost every disaster that I've been a part of. So it's just really exciting to be talking about that, but also some of the technology that disaster services is using, working with aid tech and creating the CARE Survivor Wallet. And this has had tremendous impact in the case management realm, specifically as it relates to disaster recovery. A lot of people look at the disaster relief space. That's where 80% of the funding is focused on, but we forget that recovery takes months, if not years. And so having tools for recovery has been a game changer for DSC. And we have been able to cut recovery times from years to months, delivery times for key assets, resources, and products from not only months down to days. And so really excited just about the way that these different pieces of technology are starting to emerge, and ultimately the impact that it has on the survivor. And as Americans, it's extremely important that we help our neighbors when they're in their most vulnerable state and then when they're in need. And it's been a long time coming, and it's necessary to have these different pieces of tech to support all the nonprofits that are doing this work on the ground.
Thank you. And Aaron and Kevin, from what I'm hearing from both of you there is that technology can play a role, and it does. And it seems that oftentimes with a large scale disaster where collaboration between multiple different organizations needs to happen, can you guys talk about then examples of where technology has been employed to facilitate that collaboration, synchronization? You talked, Kevin, about the aid tech survivor wallet disbursements platform. Aaron, you talked about crisis cleanup, your dashboard, how you guys, work together. But given that we're talking about two different technical approaches here, but ultimately helping survivors, but can you guys give any good examples of collaboration and where it's happening and how is that improving across disaster relief in general?
Yeah, I can start off quick. So working with aid tech over the last 3 to 5 years at this point, it was really developed with DSC's thought leadership and input. However, the idea is for this to be shared with any national VOAD member, state or local, community-based, faith-based organization to leverage this technology in their own communities. We recognize that disaster relief is a whole community approach that's required, and not one single organization or one single sector can do this alone. And so when we talk about partners for the CARE Survivor Wallet that DSC is currently using for case management and House in the Box, we've actually teamed up with Amazon Business that is enabling us to deliver products last mile in a way that we've never been able to do before. We used to always be brick and mortar. We'd have national vendors that would ship their materials in, then our case management system would then schedule time for the survivor to come pick them up. But recognizing the vulnerabilities of individuals, each community, each family is unique. This program and this technology allows for more accessibility and equity for different communities where these products can be shipped directly to their home at no additional cost. We're also in the process of working with Home Depot for the similar programs, but for repair and rebuild materials. It's silly to think that everyone has a pickup truck that can put beds, sofa couches, 2x4s, drywall on. A lot of these people are elderly people. A lot of these people are a lower social economic status, and it's important to be able to create these efficiencies, and we wouldn't be able to do that without the technology. And then lastly, we're working with Walmart, where we used to have to hand out gift cards. That is an antiquated system. We're now able to, we're pushing towards a system where we can put Walmart credits on survivors' phones, and they can go redeem those at local Walmarts, where in rural areas, the Walmart is the central hub of the community. And so I really am just grateful for the technology in the way that we are delivering this, but it's just so important to also include those partners. Now, from the nonprofit side, we have funding from American Red Cross. We have funding from community foundations. There's a lot of partners that believe in what we're doing, and they see the big picture that eventually this is going to be an approach that will be universally adopted.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. And Aaron, over to you. Keen to hear your thoughts on collaboration between organizations at scale.
Yeah, it's as a disaster relief technologist, you'd think I'd be bullish on technology, and I'm actually not in this particular space. And I might even come across as pessimistic on the issue of collaboration, even though, of course, that's how I spend my life's work is encouraging collaboration. And the reason is in the VOAD space, voluntary organizations active in disasters, we espouse 4 ideals. We call them the 4 C's: communication, coordination, collaboration, and cooperation. Now, if those 4 principles came naturally, we would not need the VOAD movement to harp on them all the time. They actually don't come very naturally. But there is a 5th silent C that does come naturally, and that is competition. Each one of our organizations are competing for grants and mind space for volunteers, for, in the faith communities, we're ideological competitors. And it's easy, it's comfortable to kind of gloss over that reality. And I think we do so at our own peril. When we, in the for-profit sector, in markets, regular old markets, co-opetition is a thing. We expect Coke and Pepsi to compete head-to-head with one another and then cooperate on shared interests. We call that co-opetition. There's this, I don't know, call it a passive-aggressive gentleman's agreement in the nonprofit space that somehow we should be above that fray. And so as a result, we kind of ignore the propensity to compete and the reality that we are in fact competing. When we do that, we miss opportunities to improve cooperation opportunities. And we also kind of just spend a lot of time wringing our hands about, like, why aren't people acting the way they should? Why is this anti-collaborative thing happening? Well, it's actually, quite predictable. Kevin, you mentioned that in the VOAD space and nonprofit sector, we always seem to be playing catch up with technology. And I totally agree. There's one really simple reason, and that is there's no money in it. Technology companies are incentivized to innovate on the leading edge of technology because that's where the highest margins are. But when we're talking about solving the world's most intractable problems, right, the problems where someone is overwhelmed and they can no longer buy a solution, they're no longer a customer, they're just simply a beneficiary, because they've been overwhelmed with their house being blown away by a tornado, or someone who's experiencing homelessness or adult illiteracy or human trafficking, for example, or being in Ukraine in the middle of a war. All of these situations where someone is overwhelmed and then others need to come to their aid and internalize some of that loss away from them. There's no macro profit opportunity here. There's no change in mindset. They can take someone who is, the victim of human trafficking and somehow turn that into a business opportunity for them. And so in that space, the organizations like Crisis Cleanup, like the volunteers we use, like St. Vincent de Paul, and thousands of other organizations and their volunteers are all about internalizing loss away from that beneficiary. There's no macro profit opportunity, and technology companies understand that, and so they stay away. Now, in that situation, technology can still play a role, and there's a lot of innovation that can and should happen, but it must always be on the trailing tail of technology, never the leading edge. Leading edge technology is where the margins are highest, and therefore it is unavailable except to the people who can pay. And we're dealing with a whole bunch of beneficiaries who can't pay, kind of by definition. So, like, for example, in Crisis Cleanup, technologically, it would be so easy for us to implement a web form where people can come and add a request. Hey, I need help cleaning out my basement. Will you come and help me? We don't do that. The reason, there are actually a couple of reasons. One is that it produces bad data. So it turns out that survivors are obviously facing a stress event, and your frontal cortex becomes impaired in that kind of a situation. And so you're physiologically incapable of understanding the words on the page. And that's just a human being thing, right? It has that happens to any of us during stress. And so the information that you get from that is dirty, it's duplicative, it's incomplete. People, submit it 23 times thinking they're going to get help faster. The details that they share and they think are relevant because emotionally it's the most relevant thing to them at that moment. It's just not relevant to the volunteers who need to know how many inches of water, for example, were in the house. So that's number one. But also number two, it's a little bit, it's not leading edge technology anymore, but it's also not trailing tail. So that's why we use a phone. We use the phone system because that's trailing tail technology. Everyone has access to a phone, even if it's a landline. And you can then talk to another human being. And that trailing tail technology is universal to the human experience and produces much better results. You have a person listening to you and asking the right questions. So that's just one example of the innovation that needs to happen on the trailing tail of technology with readily available commodities, not the leading edge. And it's to enhance those 4 C's that we talked about earlier. They're foundational, but they don't actually make disaster relief happen. For that, you need the 4 R's of disaster relief. And those are, in order of importance, relationships, resources, roles, and responsibilities. And the order matters. So if you have responsibilities without roles, well, that just yields confusion. Nobody really knows who's going to do what. If you have roles without resources, well, that just yields impotence. Nothing actually gets done without resources. And if you have resources without relationships, that's when everybody starts fighting about the resources, and you get backstabbing and infighting and pushing and shoving, that kind of a thing. And so, just like in real estate, where the 3 most important principles are location, 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 right? Like in disaster relief, it's relationships, relationships, relationships. And to the extent that you can create trailing tail technology that will enhance human relationships, then that is where you want to innovate in something like disaster relief or human trafficking or adult illiteracy or homelessness.
Thank you, Aaron. I think that's something at ATEC we've seen firsthand working with people, in that we've got to get to know the people. We've got to know who's doing what are their roles, determine responsibilities, and that's been a lesson that we've it's taken us some time to learn, but so important. And Aaron, before we wrap it up, I understand you are in the process of publishing a pretty impressive, if I understand right, academic paper called The Unmarkets, and it's titled The Intractable Economics of Overwhelming Asymmetrical Loss. I think it touches on some of the topics that you spoke about there, but can you give us a teaser of what is to come with the Unmarkets, and where can we expect to see that, and what impact do you expect it to have to your peers, your co-workers, people in the space, and ultimately what impact do you feel it will have on the disaster relief space?
Well, I think all of us at one point or another have asked some version of the question, like, how is it that we live in a time where we can land spacecraft upright, and yet some of these intractable problems that I've spoken of exist? How is it that we can't seem to innovate our way out of ancient problems like homelessness? Why is it that we have to reinvent the wheel after every disaster? Why is it that we have neglected tropical diseases in countries with a bunch of poor people, for example? Why is that? Why can't we just innovate our way out of it? Right? The myth, the story of human innovation says that if we start with even the most impossible problem, we can, with hard work and innovation and research, turn that impossible problem, let's say like global communications to the ancient Greeks, was impossible. It outstripped all known laws of physics. But with hard work and innovation, you can change it into merely a difficult problem, as we saw at the beginning of the century or last century. And with more work and effort and energy, we can take that difficult problem and change it into an easy solution. And now we all carry global communication systems in our pockets, or at least the interfaces. And that's only half of the story. The other half of the story, the part that we don't like, that we don't tell, we don't even have a vocabulary for it, are those intractable problems where the innovation is not rewarded with profit. SpaceX is making money, right? Like they're in this sub market, right, where they can be rewarded. But when your job is to internalize the loss of a third party, the incentives for solving problems kind of go haywire. In a market, you have a customer, right? A customer is a beneficiary and a funder. I buy the thing and I fund it, I buy it, and I benefit from it. But once you overwhelm that customer, and the customer can no longer pay for a solution, you split those concepts of funder and beneficiary apart, and then you separate them. And now you have a beneficiary who's in a position who only receives loss. And you have a funder who is now a separate entity with their own interests. And their job is to internalize some of that loss away from the beneficiary. But their interests never 100% overlap. When you're a customer, your interests 100% overlap, right? Like I'm funding 100% for the beneficiary, who is myself. And understanding the natural consequences of that separation and the rather perverse incentives that arise really explains a lot of the inefficiencies and the ruts that we're stuck in as we try to solve the world's most intractable problems. What impact will it have? I mean, my hope is that by naming it and giving the space and giving policymakers and researchers a taxonomy to describe what's going on, we can improve the efficiencies of unmarkets considerably. Maybe 2 or 3x or more. That's my hope. And obviously, it will remain to be seen whether that happens. But that's why I'm doing it.
Good. Thank you, Aaron. And Kevin, final question to you. We're back to technology, but with an eye to the future, are there any upcoming technologies in particular that you think can revolutionize the work that people do in the space? And what do you think are the potential hurdles for their implementation? But overwhelmingly, what are the big opportunities that we have right now that you're seeing on the ground day to day?
Sure. So, Esri and all these other companies that have done GIS have helped shape how we model potential disasters, looking at vulnerability indices to see if a storm was to hit here with a storm surge of X. These are the people that are going to be most impacted. Technology has contributed significantly to how we prepare and anticipate impact, but not so much on how do we respond and recover. I think that the technology has actually already been built. And to Aaron's point, it's a function of coordination and having that mutual respect between trusted agents and partners. I mean, imagine using crisis cleanup where you have the American Red Cross and others that are doing preliminary damage assessments. Those are then put into the crisis cleanup system where the Mennonites might do the muck outs, the Lutherans might put the new roof on, and then the care wallet can come in similarly where it says now, the Corps is going to do the repair and rebuild and finish that. And then disaster services will come in and provide all the furniture. To be able to have that sequence of delivery and that continuity of service from the voluntary community is, in my mind, the best way we can do this. And we have that technology technically already built through crisis cleanup and through this care survivor wallet. It's really a function of getting everybody on board and having true leadership. When you look at FEMA, there's an incident commander through the ICS and NIM systems, the incident command system. In the voluntary sector, while we have state and territory VOADs and leaders, those are largely unpaid positions. And there really isn't a system for which there's one entity that can direct, like truly direct with accountability, different organizations to ensure that no one's left behind and that there's a smooth transition from one organization providing service to the next. Crisis cleanup does a great job of trying to tackle that. And I think that's the same with the care wallet. But I think it's going to really take everyone getting together to adopt this technology, understand it, respect it, and implement it, quite frankly. And I think once we get there, Aaron, I don't know what you think, but I would say that we could reduce recovery times from years to truly to months if the resources are there. So I think the human element, technology is only as good as the humans that use it. And I think that we have catch up to do from the emergency management disaster relief community to respect the technology that's being developed. And if there is additional tech that needs to be created, then we need to start having those conversations.
But and actually, Kevin, as you mentioned, I am going to push back slightly on some of the premise you mentioned in government, where we have the command and control structures to streamline and direct resources, and that's great, and in many circumstances that can be highly effective. That model, though, the reason that it does not work in a VOAD space or in communities in general is because it's artificial and it does not reflect the way that communities actually work. So if you ask the question, like, who's in charge, the HOA or the PTA? The question is nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense. Like, what do you mean the HOA or the PTA? Communities themselves are non-hierarchical. In fact, government itself is mostly non-hierarchical. Who's in charge? The Parks and Rec department or the health department? Like, what? Again, that question doesn't even make sense. We have NIMS and ICS, command and control structures that are the exception to the rule. And then when we try to apply that to the whole community, unsurprisingly, it fails spectacularly, consistently, and in very predictable ways, whether we're talking about applying it to the VOAD space or to communities generally. I am more in favor of a model that I've kind of fallen in love with, called so instead of centralized versus decentralized, and talking about authority to direct, I think we should talk instead about stewardship, and not necessarily centralized versus decentralized, but recognizing that communities are polycentric. There are many centers of resources and authorities, legal authority being one type of authority, but different from the authority that a Methodist minister has to perform a disaster relief ministry, or the authority that he may have over his congregation, for example. Recognizing that these polycentric stewardships exist, and then developing systems to allow those many centers to interact with one another and overlap in natural ways. The community works that way all the time. Disasters shove us all together in very uncomfortable ways sometimes, and we have to figure out how to get along in cramped quarters. That's what makes disasters so challenging. So I personally would be in favor and have a lot of excitement about developing like an ICS 2.0, the incident collaboration system, for example, something along those lines, where there's a recognition that there is no pyramid and nobody is on top, which is the way the communities work. Now you have a different kind of efficiency there, and you have different kinds of accountability. It's not hierarchical accountability, but it is collaborative accountability. And collaborative accountability is the type of accountability that you have on a team. So let's say that you have a football team and you have one member who is not pulling his weight. Halftime comes around, everybody goes into the locker room, and a little bit of collaborative accountability ensues, right? That's the type of accountability that happens in communities, and that we need to facilitate if we're going to make demonstrable gains in efficiency.
I think you hit the nail on the head right there. And I agree that it's non-hierarchical, but most organizations don't like other organizations telling them what to do. But in your point, someone has to facilitate that. Someone has to be have that high 30,000 level view to understand how all these different organizations can work together. Because when most organizations that come in to disaster zone, they're hyper focused on what they provide, and maybe 90% of their services, and 10% what is everybody else doing, and are we making sure that we're fitting in to that. So I think that's the key thing, is that facilitation piece, and I would 100% agree with you.
Aaron and Kevin, we're just at time right now, but I want to thank you both for jumping on the pod. I certainly learned a huge amount, from the 4 C's to the 4 R's to the unmarkets, the approaches that you guys are taking, and truly heartening to see the blood, sweat, and tears effort that you guys put into the work that you do, and how you weave an element of compassion and humanity in amongst all of that technology that you've prepped. And I think the template, the models that you guys have put forth, the work you do in the US is it should be a template for other countries around the world. So it was a pleasure to have you both speak with me. I've certainly learned a huge amount listening to you both, and look forward to continuing the conversation. And we really appreciate your time. So thank you both.
Thank you, Niall.
Thank you, Niall. Great to see you, Aaron.
Good to see you too.